Don't forget to like the video, share your thoughts or story in the comments and subscribe to our latest stories. Before I start, tell me where you are watching me from. I wonder which cities and towns will join me in this memory that will follow me for years. I remember that evening so vividly, almost as if it's been etched into the corners of my mind. It was one of those late afternoons when the light fades quicker than you expect, the air holding a faint chill that makes you pull your sweater tighter around your shoulders. I had just settled down with a cup of tea, the kind of quiet moment I looked forward to after a long day, when the sharp knock on my door startled me. It wasn't just the sound, it was the timing. My neighbor, Tom, had a habit of stopping by, but usually he gave me a call or waved from across the yard first. That night, his knock carried a kind of urgency I couldn't quite place. I hesitated, teacup still in my hand, staring at the door as if the wood could tell me who was behind it. My house was dim, shadows stretching long across the walls, and for a second, I wondered if ignoring the knock would be the safer choice. But something inside me tugged, an intuition I'd learned not to ignore over the years. Slowly, I set the cup down, smoothed my sweater, and opened the door. There he was, standing on my porch, shoulders stiff, eyes darting past me as though checking who else might be inside. Tom had always been kind, the sort of man who mowed his lawn twice a week and waved politely every morning, but that night he looked different. His face carried tension, and even though he tried to force a smile, it didn't reach his eyes. "Evening," he said, his voice low. "Sorry to bother you, but could we talk for a moment?" I blinked, unsure. We'd shared conversations before about weather, about the neighborhood, about the way autumn seemed to come earlier each year, but never had he come to me looking like that, as though he was carrying a weight too heavy for him alone. Something in my chest tightened. Against the little voice whispering caution, I stepped aside and let him in. The warmth of my living room wrapped around us, but it didn't ease the tension. He sat on the edge of my couch, his hands clasped, knuckles pale. I took the chair across from him, folding my legs beneath me, and studied his expression. Silence stretched, filled only by the ticking of the clock on the wall and the faint whistle of the wind outside. Finally, I broke it. "Tom, you're making me nervous. What's going on?" His eyes flicked up to meet mine, and in them, I saw something raw, something I hadn't expected. "I don't want to alarm you," he said slowly, "but I've noticed a few things around here. Things that don't feel right." The words sat heavy in the air. My first instinct was suspicion, not of what he was saying, but of why he was saying it to me. My life had been steady for years, uneventful even, and I wasn't the type to get pulled into neighborhood drama. Yet there he was, a man who barely spoke more than polite phrases, suddenly confiding in me. "What do you mean, things that don't feel right?" I asked, leaning forward, my hands resting on my knees. He took a breath, rubbed his palms together as though steadying himself. "Strange cars parked near your house. Lights on when you're not home. A couple of nights ago, I saw someone walking around your yard. They didn't belong here." My heart skipped. At first, I wanted to dismiss it, chalk it up to paranoia or an overactive imagination. But then I thought back. I remembered the faint creak on my porch last week when I'd sworn no one was there. I remembered the feeling of being watched, the unexplained flicker of unease that had settled in my stomach. A shiver ran through me. "And you didn't call the police?" He shook his head. "I didn't want to overstep. I thought maybe I was imagining it. But tonight, I couldn't ignore it anymore. I needed you to know." The room felt smaller, the air thicker. I tried to read his face, to decide if he was being truthful or if there was something else hidden behind his words. My suspicion grew, not of strangers, but of him. Why was he watching me so closely? Why was he the one to notice, and not anyone else? Yet, as I looked at him, I realized his concern was genuine. His hands trembled slightly, his shoulders hunched forward as if he was bracing himself for disbelief. This wasn't a man playing games. This was a man torn between caution and care, someone who'd chosen to risk awkwardness just to warn me. Still, the unease lingered. I glanced toward the window, half expecting to see shadows moving beyond the glass. My mind raced, torn between gratitude for his honesty and wariness of what it meant. "Why didn't you say something sooner?" I asked, my voice softer now. He lowered his gaze. "Because I didn't want to scare you. And maybe, because I wasn't sure you'd believe me." His honesty struck me in a place I hadn't expected. How many times had I dismissed my own instincts, told myself not to make a fuss, convinced myself everything was fine? Maybe I was guilty of the same, choosing comfort over truth. I sat back, feeling the weight of the moment press down on me. The air between us shifted, no longer neighborly small talk, but something heavier, more intimate in its honesty. He had placed his trust in me, and now I had a choice, to turn away, or to listen. I nodded slowly, though my mind was far from calm. "All right," I said. "Tell me everything you've noticed. Every detail." And so he did. As his words filled the room, I realized my quiet little world wasn't as simple as I thought. Suspicion had knocked on my door that night, and I was right not to ignore it. Tom's voice carried a weight I wasn't prepared for. He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his fingers weaving together and pulling apart like he couldn't decide whether to hold on or let go. The living room, usually my place of peace, felt foreign that night. Shadows crept along the walls from the lamplight, stretching long and uneasy, like they too were listening. He began recounting the little things he had noticed. At first, they sounded almost trivial: footsteps late at night, headlights pausing too long near my driveway, a figure crossing the corner of my yard. But as he strung the pieces together, the picture became harder to ignore. "The other night," he said, his voice dropping low, "I saw someone standing by your back gate. Just standing there, not moving. They left when I came out, but I know what I saw." A chill prickled at the back of my neck. I tried to remind myself that sometimes the mind plays tricks in the dark. But the firmness in his tone told me he wasn't imagining it. I folded my arms tight across my chest, as though I could keep the fear from sinking in. "Why would anyone be interested in me?" I asked, forcing a little laugh, but my voice cracked. "I live a quiet life. I don't bother anyone." He shook his head. "Sometimes that's exactly what makes someone vulnerable." I didn't know what unsettled me more, his warning, or the fact that part of me believed him. I found my eyes drifting toward the front window, expecting to see movement where there was none. The silence outside pressed in, heavy and absolute. Tom leaned back, his eyes softening as if he regretted dropping all this on me at once. "I didn't want to frighten you. But I couldn't keep quiet. You deserve to know." I studied him, the lines on his face, the tiredness in his eyes. He wasn't just talking about shadows and strangers. There was something deeper there, a sense of responsibility that went beyond casual concern. My suspicion of him hadn't vanished completely, but I couldn't deny the sincerity in his words. I cleared my throat. "So what do you suggest I do?" He hesitated, his jaw tightening as if weighing how much to say. "Lock your doors, double-check your windows. And maybe don't stay alone at night for a while. At least until we're sure." The suggestion made me bristle. I'd lived on my own for years, managed fine without anyone watching over me. Yet, the tremor in his voice struck me in a place I hadn't expected. It wasn't about control, it was about care. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The clock ticked steadily in the background, and I realized my hands were trembling slightly. Finally, I let out a slow breath. "All right. I'll be cautious. But I don't want to live in fear, Tom." He nodded, his gaze steady. "I don't want you to, either. That's why I came." The way he said it lingered in the air, heavier than the words themselves. He could have kept this to himself, gone on with his life, but instead he crossed the street, knocked on my door, and risked sounding foolish. That alone told me something important about him. The night stretched on as we sat in my living room, going over every detail he could remember. At times, I caught myself watching his face rather than listening to the words, seeing the way his brow furrowed, how he paused before choosing each phrase carefully, not wanting to alarm me more than necessary. There was a gentleness beneath his concern, the kind of quiet strength that reveals itself when someone has nothing to gain and everything to lose. Eventually, the clock struck 10, and he rose from the couch reluctantly. "I should let you rest," he said, his voice softer now. "But promise me you'll be careful." I walked him to the door, the hallway light spilling over us. As he stepped onto the porch, I caught the faintest hint of weariness in his shoulders, as if carrying the burden of both our safety had already taken its toll. "I will," I said. "And Tom, thank you." He gave a small nod, meeting my eyes with a look I couldn't quite read. Concern, yes. But something else, 2. Something unspoken that hung between us like the chill in the autumn air. Then he turned and crossed the yard back to his house, his figure swallowed by the shadows. I stood at the door long after he'd gone, my hand resting on the frame, my thoughts tangled. I had always seen him as just the man next door, quiet, polite, distant. But tonight had shifted something. Tonight, suspicion had pulled me into his world, and whether I was ready or not, it was a world I couldn't ignore anymore. When I finally locked the door and returned to my chair, the tea had long gone cold. But the echo of his words stayed warm in my mind. Sometimes it's the quiet ones who are most vulnerable. And as I sat there, staring at the flickering lamp, I couldn't help but wonder, was I more vulnerable than I had ever dared to believe? That night, sleep didn't come easily. Every creak in the house, every rustle of branches outside made me sit up, alert and uneasy. I kept telling myself I was overreacting, that Tom's words had planted seeds of worry that grew larger in the dark. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted, that the quiet life I had taken for granted was no longer untouched. By morning, I was tired but determined. I checked the locks twice before leaving for work, glanced over my shoulder more than once as I walked to the car. The neighborhood, which usually felt so familiar, now carried an edge of suspicion. Was that car parked down the street really just waiting, or watching? Was the man walking his dog truly a neighbor, or someone else entirely? Later that afternoon, I saw Tom again. He was raking leaves in his front yard, his movements deliberate, almost mechanical. I hesitated, then walked over, drawn by a mix of unease and gratitude. He straightened when he saw me, leaning on the rake handle, his eyes searching mine. Rough night? He asked quietly. I let out a small laugh, though it lacked humor. You could say that. I kept hearing things. He nodded, as if he had expected that. It's hard to unsee or unhear once your mind starts paying attention. But sometimes, it's better to be aware than blind. We stood there for a moment, the autumn air crisp around us, leaves crunching underfoot. I studied him again, the set of his jaw, the way his hands gripped the rake as though it grounded him. He wasn't a man seeking attention or drama, he was a man carrying burdens quietly, maybe more than I realized. Why are you helping me? I asked suddenly, the question slipping out before I could stop it. You could have kept to yourself. Most neighbors would. His eyes met mine, steady and unflinching. Because I know what it's like to ignore the signs until it's too late. The words settled between us like a stone in water, rippling outward. He didn't explain further, and I didn't press him, but I saw the shadow that crossed his face. It told me enough. His warning wasn't born only from observation, it was born from experience. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Tom came by again. This time, there was no knock of urgency, just a gentle tap, followed by his calm presence on my porch. He carried a small flashlight in his hand. I thought we could check around your place together, he offered. Might put your mind at ease. Part of me hesitated. Letting someone walk my property, peer into the spaces I considered private, wasn't something I took lightly. But the thought of doing it alone unsettled me more. After a pause, I nodded, and together we stepped into the gathering dusk. We walked slowly, the beam of his flashlight cutting through the shadows. The garden looked ordinary enough, the fence weathered but standing strong, the shed tucked neatly in the corner. Yet every corner we turned carried the weight of possibility. At one point, Tom crouched near the back gate, running his hand along the latch. See this, he said softly. It's loose. Someone's been here. My breath caught. He shone the light closer, revealing faint scratches on the metal. They weren't the kind made by age or weather, they were fresh. My stomach knotted, the world narrowing around me. He looked up, his eyes steady, calm. You weren't imagining it. There's been someone here. I felt the ground shift beneath me. Fear, sharp and undeniable, surged through my chest, but so did something else, an odd sense of clarity. All those moments I'd brushed off, all those instincts I'd silenced, had been trying to tell me the truth. And Tom had been the only one to see it with me. We finished our walk around the property in silence, the weight of discovery settling in. When we returned to the porch, I realized my hands were shaking. Tom noticed, too, and for a moment, he hesitated, as though unsure if he should speak. Then he said quietly, "You don't have to go through this alone." His words lingered long after he left, echoing in the quiet of my house. Alone, that was how I had chosen to live, content with my solitude, proud of my independence. But for the first time in years, I wondered if strength always had to mean standing alone. That night, I locked every window, checked every door twice, and sat in my chair staring at the shadows stretching across the floor. Somewhere in that stillness, I realized something profound. Suspicion had opened a door I didn't expect, not just to the danger outside, but to the possibility of connection I hadn't allowed myself to consider. And though I didn't yet know where it would lead, I knew this much: Tom's knock had changed everything. The following days blurred together in a haze of heightened awareness. I caught myself glancing out the window more often than I'd like to admit, my eyes tracing every unfamiliar car, every passerby who lingered too long. The normal rhythm of my life, watering plants, folding laundry, brewing tea, now carried a new layer of vigilance. Tom checked in regularly, never overbearing, always careful with his words and presence. Sometimes it was just a wave from across the yard, other times a short knock followed by a quiet, just making sure everything's all right. Each visit reassured me in ways I hadn't anticipated. What I once viewed as intrusion began to feel like something else: solidarity. One evening, as the last of the light faded from the sky, he stopped by again. This time, his expression was more serious. He held a small notepad, pages filled with scribbles and dates. "I've kept track of what I've seen," he said, handing it to me. "Patterns, times. It's not random." I sat down with him at the kitchen table, the lamplight spilling across the paper. My heart tightened as I scanned his notes: late-night sightings, odd cars, movements near the fence. The evidence was there, carefully recorded, undeniable. "You've been watching out for me this whole time," I whispered, the realization settling deeper than before. He gave a small shrug, his eyes meeting mine. "I couldn't do nothing. Not when I knew." We sat together in the quiet hum of the kitchen, and for the first time in a long time, I felt something shift inside me. It wasn't just fear anymore, it was trust. A fragile thread, yes, but real. That night, the sound came again. A faint crunch of footsteps near the back of the house. My breath caught, every nerve in my body alert. I reached for the phone, but before I could dial, there was another knock, this time at my front door. My heart pounded, torn between dread and hope. I opened the door to find Tom, flashlight in hand, his jaw set. "I heard it too," he said firmly. "Let's check together." The fear was sharp, but I nodded. Side by side, we walked into the dark yard, the beam of his light steady ahead of us. The night air was cool against my skin, filled with the distant rustle of trees. At the back gate, the latch hung loose again, swaying slightly. But whoever had been there was gone. I exhaled, my body trembling, but I wasn't alone. Tom stood there, calm, grounded, his presence steady against the shadows that threatened to overwhelm me. "We'll call the police in the morning," he said gently. "This isn't just coincidence anymore." Back inside, I leaned against the door, my legs weak. He stayed a few minutes longer, making sure I was all right before leaving me to rest. But as I watched him cross the yard back to his home, a thought struck me with undeniable clarity. He hadn't just been protecting me from the unknown outside, he had been reminding me of something I'd forgotten. That connection, trust, and even vulnerability could be strengths. In the days that followed, officers came to check the property, reassured me they'd patrol the neighborhood more closely. The fear didn't vanish overnight, but it became something else, something I could face, because I wasn't facing it alone. Looking back now, I realized that knock on my door wasn't just about suspicion. It was about truth, about opening myself to someone's care when I least expected it. Tom's concern had peeled back the walls I'd built around myself, walls I thought were keeping me safe but were really keeping me isolated. My neighbor's knock had made me suspicious. And I was right. But what I didn't expect was how much that knock would change me, not just in how I saw the world, but in how I saw myself. Sometimes, the smallest interruptions carry the deepest lessons. And this one, I know, will follow me for years.